Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for giving your time. So to jump straight into conversation, first thing I want to know is what led you into fashion?
I've always been interested, and I think when I was little, my sisters used to buy fashion magazines, and I was obsessed with them. So from a very early age, I was looking at my older sisters' fashion magazines, and I started collecting them. And I studied art because at that time I didn't really understand that it was possible to have a career in fashion. And it was only as I was coming towards the end of my degree that I was in the library and I came across a book and I realised it was possible to have a career in fashion. So I just wrote letters to the major department stores in London. I mean, it was as simple as that. And then they wrote back and I went for a couple of interviews and that's how it started. So I started off working for House of Fraser for a long time. And really sort of learnt about the industry and learnt the ropes, and then I moved on to Harrods, and that was really exciting. So that was my route in.
One thing I want to take from there, so you mentioned obviously you learned that there could be this career in fashion, and that enticed you in.
Yeah.
And so your initiative there was to write letters to heads of the department. So is this a case of you researched, right, here's some companies I like, here's the people I need to be connected to, I need to speak to these people, so how can I connect with them? I'll write them a letter.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, what you've got to remember is that was quite a long time ago. So the letter writing thing was quite normal then. There was no email, there was none of these other ways of contacting people, so it was literally writing to somebody. And I think at that time, I'm not even sure that I had names of heads of department. It was just to whoever it might concern. And they wrote back, and that's how I got in. But back then, that was quite normal, and it was while I was at House of Fraser that email kind of, was invented, and we all started using it. So it's a very archaic, old-fashioned kind of way of doing it.
How many letters did you send out then? Was it only a few and you got, or was it loads?
It was just I just literally targeted department stores in central London, and I got an offer from Harrods, but at that time I was thinking, oh no, I don't really want to be here. But I went to House of Fraser because it was a head office environment and I could learn about every single role, and back then working for a department store meant that you could buy brands, and it also meant that you could learn how to develop products for own label. So if you were a bit creative, which I was, it meant that you could you were able to carry on being creative within a business environment.
Okay, so obviously you had a great amount of time at House of Fraser and Harrods, and being a buyer, from what you took away from that career and what you learned, and obviously went on to start businesses yourself, what would you say was more valuable in lessons? Was it the connections you made in your time there, or was it the actual information that you learned? What for you has been more valuable since then?
I'd say it was both.
Mm-hmm. The
connections you make are really important, but looking back on it, I realise now that every single one of those connections was important, not just business connections and connections with people in other businesses, but just the friendships you make as well. I mean, every single one of those connections was really, really important. And I've got friends that are lifelong friends from that time, but also friends that I've kind of done business with since. I mean, all of those connections were really important, and it was a great way to start. But the other thing I would say was at Harrods, when you are a buyer at Harrods, it's almost like running a small business unit. So that was great practice for then starting, if you then want to go on and start your own company, it's a great foundation, which I don't really think, well, I don't know, maybe you do, but at the time, I don't think I really would have got that anywhere else.
So did you have quite a lot of autonomy around decision making? So obviously you was there as a buyer, both at House of Fraser and Harrods. So was it down to you as such to be like, right, let's start stocking these brands and these companies?
Yeah, you definitely, because of the culture at Harrods was different. And the people they employ, they give autonomy to, and it meant that people could do amazing things. It was much. I mean, obviously there were lots of decisions that were made by lots of people, but you really did have autonomy as an individual, and you were able to create successful areas and do amazing things.
Does the working for big names like Harrods and House Fraser, do you think it makes it easier in terms of, I just think they're almost set in, it's kind of like, when I think of Harrods, it's kind of like what they say goes, like if they're saying this is cool, this is cool.
Yeah.
So did that make it easier in a sense? Whereas I think compared to like a small local store that maybe it's like independent or hasn't got the same level of branches and that kind of thing, would it be harder for them to try and select because they haven't got the fan base or the recognition and the reputation to say this is where you're going to get the names you need?
When you work for a company like that and you want to introduce a new product and you call them up and you say where you're from, people are pleased to receive the call.
Yeah.
It's not hard work. You're not there having to sort of tell people who you are and lay any kind of foundation. It's almost like people know it and they're happy to hear from you. And also, it doesn't matter. You can have a long career working with loads of different kinds of stores, but if you've worked for Harrods, that's the one that everybody wants to know about. It's the one that sticks in people's minds. So it works in many different sorts of situations, both while you're working for them and after, once it's passed. And anywhere in the world, I'd say, you can be, and I have been, working in a factory in Bangkok, and then you'll mention Harrods, and suddenly everybody wants to know about that, however long or short a period of time it is.
So you had quite a successful run at both House of Fraser and Harrods, and you were there for like multiple years. So what made you stay with them? I suppose each company's different, so it'd be good to hear both sides and your experience. But what made you stay for those years? But also, what was the catalyst for you to say, right, I'm now going to leave?
I'd always wanted to have my own company, my own brand. I've always wanted to do that, so that was always in my head anyway. But I think at both of those places, I was always happy to. But I mean, I enjoyed working for those companies, and I was always learning something. And it was only when I got to a point where, in both places, where I thought I've done as much as I can here, or I've learned as much as I can here, it's time to move on. And it was as simple as that.
I'm really interested because I've heard people talk about that before, especially like other podcasts that I listen to. I've heard people talk about this ability to, whether you're running a company or whether you're employed, but this ability to be there for the purpose of learning and be able to go, right, I've now learned what I need to learn, and it's now a good opportunity for me to move on. And how did you calculate that for yourself? And was it the fact that other opportunities seemed to start coming up, or was it more a case of you were just thinking about day to day what you're doing month by month and going, actually, I feel like it's now getting quite repetitive, and I know the challenges that I'm going to come up with and I can deal with them, so now I need something else?
I think, well, I mean, yes, I learned so much from those places, but also I really enjoyed those positions, and so it wasn't just, what can I get from them? It was what I could do as well, and I really was enjoying all of that time. And it just got to a stage where I just thought I could carry on like this forever, but then there are all these other things I want to do. And I think you mentioned earlier, it's one of those things, you know, there are things in your life that you want to do and you don't want to get to the end of your life and think, I wish I'd have tried doing that. It's that, it's the classic thing. And I really did, having known for all those years that I wanted to do something, I just didn't want to waste any time, and I just wanted to get on with it, really.
So of course now you've got Clips, which is broken into Novkovic, Davies and Front Row Repro.
Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to ask first was Novkovic, Davies, so the handbag selection.
Yeah.
You do 4 slots per year where people can buy, is that right?
Yeah.
That sounds, in my head, that sounds both really clever in the sense of it creates that demand and that intrigue, but also it seems like counterintuitive, a bit like, so there's only 4 times per year where you're going to get like a lump of revenue. So what inspired that idea?
Because it's thinking about ethical fashion, really. The bags are made to order, so we're not ever in a situation where we're producing loads and loads of stock and having loads of excess stock lying around. So we only make what people want. If you want something, then we'll make it. Now, we also didn't want to be in a situation where you're shipping things constantly, because that isn't good for the environment either. So it's better to limit it to 4 times a year. So if you've got a spring collection, a summer collection, an autumn collection, a winter collection, there's only really 4 times a year you need to be buying. We don't need to be shopping all the time, except I know, you know, it's a hard habit to get out of. So that was really the thinking behind it, to sort of minimise all the shipping, and just be focusing on 4 drops. It just made everything simpler, especially from a made-to-order point of view. If you could be making to order at the same time for everybody, it's much easier.
So there you've talked about, as a brand, it feels like for you there's a huge importance in sustainability, being ethical within fashion. Is that something you've seen? I suppose, how have you seen the relationship between like being ethical, sustainable and the fashion industry, and has that changed over the last couple decades and such?
Well, what's changed for me really is I mean, it just like for everybody else, there's a realization that actually it can't continue the way it is. So with both of those things, it's just trying to look at it from a different perspective. There is too much produced. There just is, and we shop too much, and it creates so many problems. And the thing that, say, if we look at Front Row Repro, that's about people creating their own fashion. Before fast fashion existed, people used to make their own clothes, and you know, at school you were taught how to make clothing. You would have, like, if you were wealthier, you had a dressmaker, and you would have clothing made for you. And then as fast fashion came into existence, all of that kind of slowly went by the wayside. And I think if you look at sustainability and people consuming more responsibly, I think it's unrealistic to expect people just to stop liking fashion, give up, and that's it, and walk away. But the thing is, I think that you can still carry on loving fashion, just make it yourself. And there are enough garments in the world to upcycle. There are enough garments in the world to repurpose fabric, and you can buy fabric organically that's made ethically if you want to. So suddenly, fashion and high fashion, it's within the grasp of anybody who wants to make it. So that's the kind of thinking behind it. It's just really observing everything and perhaps coming at it at a different angle.
How does it feel? Because I'm curious, I'm often curious of brands, companies making products within the fashion industry, and then, as you've alluded, like all this, the challenges with fast fashion, especially the environmental implications. And so there are a lot of brands, especially like with, I think now, like with every year, you see more and more people that are really thriving on sustainability and looking at where the materials are sourced from and how environmentally friendly their products can be. Does it feel, because you've just said there, like, make stuff, you don't need to buy stuff, just make it, upcycle, recycle. So does it feel in your mind like you're still selling products though, because you've got Novkovic, Davies, so you're selling handbags. So does it feel kind of a bit like, I want people to buy my products, but then on the other hand, when someone makes an order, could they have just made a bag, or have they got a bag at home that they could just utilize instead of buying my bag? Do you have that conflict?
They could do both.
Yeah.
And I mean, on Front Row Repro, we've got a little course that teaches someone how to make a very nice handbag. It's perfectly possible. Yeah, they can do both. I mean, I think that, like I said, it's unrealistic to expect people to stop completely, but definitely there are better ways of doing things. And then also there are ways of, just making things, just doing it themselves. So yeah, I want them to do both.
You mentioned about, obviously, as we was talking before we started recording, of like having these ambitions and drivers, and like if you live an existence where you've put your time and effort towards goals that you want to achieve, whether they're financial, whether they're to do with connections and friendships, whether they're to do with business. But obviously, even if you don't achieve them, come to the end of your life, and if you've put the effort in, it's like, yeah, but I committed my time to it and I had great fun, even though I didn't get to that specific goal. I got 90% of the way there, and that 90% journey was so much fun, or not. But for you, where has happiness thrived in your career? So you've been at House of Fraser, you've been at Harrods, you've had your own businesses. Where's happiness thrived?
I think with all the people that I've worked with, definitely, but also I'm never happier than when I'm creating product, when I'm making things. I love that. So it's a combination of the two. Making things with all my colleagues, those have been the greatest times, and buying. Especially at House of Fraser, where we were developing products ourselves, you really were kind of creating things, and it was a lot of fun.
So that's interesting. I thought you'd put something in there about having your own business and it being your own venture, but not specifically. It's more the connection.
Things.
Yeah,
it's the same things, and I'd say those exact same things are the things I've enjoyed in my businesses, making things, and the people I've worked with.
So on the opposite, where have you found your happiness has been challenged the most through your career?
Oh God. Well, I spent a lot of years hating flying, which was really problematic. But I managed to recover from that. But at one point, I just got into my head that I was scared of flying, and because I had to travel so much.
I was going to say, you must have been to and fro all the time.
That was quite problematic. But I managed to. I mean, I was travelling so much with work that I just had to get on with it, basically, and it was either, have a nice time on an aeroplane or just be miserable through the whole flight. So I just had to sort of have a word with myself and get through. But that's quite challenging.
But even then, you've got the great story that you've overcome that fear, and because although it was challenging, but you've overcome it, and that's well, I hope you have.
Yeah.
So how do you've got Front Row Repro and Novkovic, Davies all within clips, but then you as we discussed before we started, there's other elements into clips that go in there. So how do you manage that, and we're at uni right now, and where you lecture as well. So how do you manage your time between different businesses, lecturing?
I don't believe in multitasking at all. So I block time out that are devoted to just one thing and one thing alone. And usually it's a day at a time where I'm focusing on whatever it is I'm working on, and I find that that's the most productive way of getting through work. And I'll also block time out for emails, for administration, for that kind of thing. Because I think if you don't do that and you're doing several things at the same time or focusing on several businesses at the same time, it's just impossible. So I don't multitask, and that just doesn't work for me. And I find it much easier if I'm just focused on one thing.
Okay. What if tasks cross over between your businesses or other endeavors you're in? So like where you're saying you don't multitask there. So say for example you were working on some content for like socials and such, but if the content could work for like say both Instagram pages, for you, are you saying no, I'm focusing on one business, or are you like no, I'm doing a task, and if it works for both, and if that's brilliant?
The thing is, with everything that I do feeds in. Every element feeds into each other. So it's quite easy from that point of view. On social media, there's lots of content that I'll create for one that actually works for the other as well. With lecturing, I mean, I lecture about what I do. So like everything feeds into everything else. So there isn't as much kind of separation as you'd imagine. And also we sort of talk about the different elements. It might kind of seem like a lot, but it all fits together.
This is really interesting because like my life right now is becoming, I suppose, a bit like similar to yours, where I've got different strings to the bow. So I'm creating this podcast, but I'm back into art, so I'm trying to work as an artist, but then I've got a hobby of skateboarding where all of these things take up a lot of time, and ideally I want to be able to devote like all my waking time to all of them. I'm really passionate. I love them all, but I've still got to do my business as well. That means I've got to like make a living, and so I have a bit of a conflict there with managing my time. And so like you've said there about focusing on one thing, so I can, when I've tried like multitasking on things, I often find one thing that frustrates me more than anything is when I'm like, right, I'm going to do this task, but then in order to do the task you realise, I've got to do a different little task off the back of it. I don't know, like I've got to go online and do something, and I go on my account and it's like, what's the password? I don't know, I've got to retrieve that. I've got to go and do something, and you just end up in a spiral of tasks. But one thing I find, I don't know, I'm curious if you've had this, and if you have, how you've overcome it, because I'm trying to work out how to overcome it. Where I have got different things that I do is if I spend a lot of time doing one thing. So like say I go out filming skateboarding for the day, I've got some footage, brilliant, that's been a productive day. I come back and I'm like, all my art stuff is where I've like is in the same position it was like a couple of days ago, because I haven't done anything for art. And I'm thinking, I've really been slacking there. But then when like skateboarder Hayden is thinking, he's going, wow, we've done loads of filming, it's brilliant, we're progressing. But then Hayden, the artist, is going, you've really slacked the last couple of days, you've done nothing. What have you been doing? You've been procrastinating. Did you have that? Have you had that kind of inner dialogue where you are doing different things?
Yes, but and I've actually read quite a few books. From business mentors. There are podcasts out there. You can get this kind of information from anywhere, where they talk about how they manage their time. When you listen to some of these people, they've got far more going on than, say, I have, or lots of other people I speak to, yet they still manage to get everything done. And one thing that I picked up from one of those is, if you're focusing on something and then you decide to switch to something completely different, the amount of energy that it takes to move into the next thing is actually not, it doesn't help you. So I kind of think if I'm doing something where I'm, say, writing a blog, or I'm writing content for social media or lecture, I'll try and do all the writing things together all at once. So once you kind of got into the flow, you can easily carry on and you can be very productive. And then on a different day, I'll do a different kind of task, and I kind of manage it like that. But when you listen to business podcasts and they talk about time management, you actually realise that there are far more successful people out there than me, who are managing to do a lot more, and then you kind of think, oh, it's easy.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's as you said there, like I've spent a lot of time listening to different podcasts, and One thing that's interesting is hearing people that you look up to that seem to be the busiest people that have got all these different projects, and then they go on about how much they can procrastinate and how much they can be quite lazy at times, which is something that when I was very focused on my own business and growing and having staff and trying to expand as quickly as possible, is the idea of stopping and slowing down and having like time to actually rest. I could not cope with that. And I still have this battle in my mind now where I have a lot more recreation time and a lot more rest. And sometimes I find that because I do have different hobbies as such and businesses going on, is that a lot of times they complement each other because they're using completely different parts of the body and the mind. So like, while one aspect of my life could be really analytical and really have to use a lot of brain power, but then another part, and like skateboarding for example, I don't really have to use my brain. I just have to go out, have fun, roll around. I'm using my body, I'm letting off steam. If there's a lot of like, I've been stressed out and focused on a lot of analytical things, it's like I can go skate, and by doing something that's productive, I'm resting my brain while still doing something that's fun and ticking a box of being productive. But I do find I've got better. I'm curious what your relationship's been like with this, because I think every person that's been in business struggles with it, is the ability to like sit down and rest and just not feel guilt. I've had it so many times where I feel guilty if I sit down and like watch a movie or something, or if I'm even got to a point in my business where if I went to hang out with my friends or my family, I would be in that moment going, I'm not responding to those emails. I'm not working on my business. I need to be growing my business. Why am I here? So I'm curious what your relationship's been like. Have you had that as well? Because it's always nice to hear someone go, yes, I've had that too.
Yeah, but you know, all of these things, like everybody faces those challenges. And even when you listen, like I said to, you know, really, really successful people, they come across those challenges as well. I mean, I definitely have that, but then you have to go back to why it is you went into business in the first place, and it wasn't so that you couldn't see your family and friends ever again. You know, that wasn't the reason. You know, so you know, you have got to find that balance, and it is a case of you know, you want to get the most out of your life, and so you have to timetable those things as well, and allow for those things, or else you know that's not going to work either. But it's very easy to look at people, you know, business mentors or really, really successful people, and think that they never have those issues, but they do. They do, and that kind of makes you feel a bit better, and you kind of push through.
Yeah, that's something like definitely with podcasting that I've learned, and I've really been grateful with the opportunity of, is that, as you said, like all these people you can look up to, and by having conversations with people that have done incredible things and had incredible careers like yourself is nice and refreshing to be able to sit down and realise everybody's human. Like we all kind of have like these different challenges mentally, physically, emotionally, and it's really refreshing to be able to, no matter what someone's done, what their circumstances is, there's always that relatability, and that's what podcasting allows. I will jump onto the final questions that I have as a closing tradition on this podcast. So first one is, what is something that exists within the world today that you hope will one day be eradicated?
Oh, gosh.
I always enjoy asking this question.
Climate change. I want the climate change situation to be fixed. That's the biggest thing. And like, we're sitting here today and we're sweltering, and it's been really uncomfortable in a heat wave.
It's very hot.
I just would like it to get to net zero.
Are you optimistic of that, or are you nervous? And
I think it will happen because it has to.
Well, yeah, the alternative is a bit bleak.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But you know, I think we've all got to do our bit, but governments especially. But I think that's the one thing I think that matters more than anything.
Good answer. No, I like that answer. That's probably the answer I would give. So, Jovanka, the last question I have is, what is a benevolent piece of news or information you would like to share with our listeners for closing? It could be something that's going on in your own life that's happened that's recently great. It could be something you've learned within the fashion industry. It could be something you just read this morning and you thought, you know what, that's great, I'm going to share that today.
Oh God, that's a tricky question. question. I can't think of anything. The only thing I really wanted to share.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know whether it's just a wonderful thing. I think for most people, or for lots of people, it's just the ability to make stuff. And a lot of the joy I've had in life, business especially, has just been creating things and being creative. And I just sort of, it's not something I'd want to share, but it's just something that I'd want more people to get into, to promote more joy for themselves and for everybody else.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah. So get creative and make stuff.
Yes.
Brilliant. I think that's a great closing. Now that if you're listening to this, go listen to an old episode of Benevolent Business while you sit and make something and have a wonderful, peaceful afternoon.
To make you happy.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jovanka. It's been absolutely amazing.